what we're looking at today is a photo album that actually the mailman for the library brought in to show us and share with us. And he has, of course, spent some time looking at it and was able to figure out that these look like they are all Irish Americans, judging by some of the names that are in there. So he let me borrow it, and I spent some time trying to find out exactly who these folks are. So let's see if I can make this work. All right, so the photographs, most of the photographs are cabinet card photographs. A cabinet card is basically a thin photographic print mounted on cardboard. It's about the size of a large index card, and they started being popular around the 1880s, although they were developed earlier than that. This photo album is designed specifically for cabinet cards. So there's this elegant frame around the image. There's a slot at the bottom that the photograph slides up into. And if you're very, very careful, you can slide the photograph back out of that frame that it's in to find additional information. So this is the first photo, the first page of the album. And when I slide it out, hoping to find the name of the person, I did not find the name of the person in the photograph, but I did find the name of the photographer, L.D. Benton of Waterbury. So I could do a little bit of digging and found out that the photographer was in Waterbury from about 1882, 1883, until about 1890, when he stopped doing photography and became more of a portrait painter. So that gives us a sense of the time period, that it's sometime in the mid to late 1880s. But without any additional information, we might not ever know who this woman is unless there's another photograph that turns up of her with her name on it. And this is the most important thing I always tell people. You've got all your photos of all your family, all your loved ones, all your friends, and you know who they are. But if you don't put the name with the photo, someday somebody will inherit those photos and have no idea who those people are. So it's always good to find some way to attach a name to a photograph. The next photo in the album, similarly, no name of this young woman. This time the photographer is the Crane Art Company when they were at 57 East Main Street. And so doing, again, a little bit of research, I was actually able to really pinpoint the year that the photograph was taken. The Crane Art Company was located at 57 East Main Street really only in 2 years, 1889 and 1890. The way I find this information is using the Waterbury city directories. And the easiest way to use them is actually on ancestry.com. You can do a keyword search for the address. So if you put 57 East Main in quotes and you tell it you want to search the city directories for Waterbury, it will pull up those specific locations, the businesses at those locations. It's a really good trick for quickly looking through the city directories. Now, this particular photograph was hiding another photograph. So here I took a photo as I was sliding out that photograph and found another photo hiding behind. Who knows how long she's been back there without anyone seeing her. Same thing, same year, same photographer, and again, no information as to who this woman was. Now here, however, the person who owned the photo album was very helpful and wrote down this young man's name, Charlie Foy. The handwriting's a little tough to decipher, especially where it smudges, but I was able to figure out that that's F-O-Y for the last name. There's no additional information on the photograph itself. He's holding a book in his hands, which at first I thought was really exciting. I was like, wow, I wonder what that book is. Does that book tell us something about this person? And I zoom in further, and I'm doing all of this just with my iPhone, and it's an old iPhone as well. And so the book that he's holding is Bigelow's album. Bigelow's album of lighting and posing, published in 1872. So this is just the photographer's prop. This is the photographer's handy dandy book on how to light and pose the figures. So it did not give me too much more information. So since I had the young man's name, I was able to do a little bit of an effort to find out who he is. In 1879 and 1880, there was a man named Charles Foy who worked as a clerk at a cigar store in Waterbury. He disappears from the records. There's a Charles Fay who is in 1882 working as a laborer. And then in 1900, there's a Mrs. Charles Foy in Waterbury. I looked around in other towns and really couldn't find anything conclusive. So there's still some mystery as to exactly who this young man was. Did not turn up in the census records. It's one of those things where a really in-depth search might eventually pull up some information about him. One of the great things I like about taking photographs of photographs is that you can really zoom in. So not only was I able to zoom in on the title of the book, but you can see the fabric of the jacket that he's wearing. You know, you can see those stripes and the shiny buttons, which is just wonderful to see that. And again, it's all just with an iPhone. So the next one also has a name. This one took me a while to figure out the handwriting, but eventually I sorted it out. And that first word there is Gene, as in Eugene. The last word is Derby, and his last name is Connaughty. And he, as it says, lived in Derby. He was born 1869 to Irish immigrants in Ansonia. And he actually died in 1947 in Derby. So he lived in the Ansonia, Derby area his whole life. And he worked as a clerk and an employee at American Brass. I'll zoom in on the full photo here. The photographer, this is actually one of the things I worked at, trying to figure out, you know, what's the time period, who is this, what's going on here. Normally, if you see the name of a photographer and it says something like J. Rubinson and Co., 8 Bank Street, Ansonia, you're going to think that the photographer's name is probably Rubinson. His first name might be something like James or John, something, you know, something like that, maybe Joseph. So this one was a stumper for a while because there was absolutely no one named J. Rubinson anywhere near Ansonia. In this case, after trying to look for who J. Rubinson was, I did that keyword search in the city directories for 8 Bank in Ansonia and found that there was a photographer named Henry Rubin, R-U-B-I-N, who owned this business. So he didn't want to go by his actual name. He was a Polish immigrant. He picked a name, J. Rubinson and Co., for his business that he presumably thought sounded impressive, and threw me off completely because I was looking for Rubinson and he was actually just Rubin. So once I was able to figure that out, I could narrow down the time period. He opened up his photography studio in 1895 and was there until about 1902. So this photograph is from the late 1890s. Another clue to that is the sort of scallop edging around the photograph, the cardboard of the photograph. That's something that you're more likely to see in the 1890s for a cabinet card photograph. Another one with the difficult to decipher handwriting, but the name is Julia McGivney. Now, obviously, if you're talking about a Waterbury photograph and a photo album and you see the name McGivney, you're going to immediately think Father McGivney, must be a relation. As far as I can tell, the only Delia McGivney in this time period was from Boston. But when we look at the photograph, it was definitely taken here in Waterbury. And Crane Art Company, I did a little research there and found that they were at 86 Bank Street between 1895 and 1896. 1894 and 1896. So sometime around 1895, if I'm correct that this is Julia McGivney from Boston, she came to Waterbury, presumably to visit family in this area, and had her photograph taken to give to her relatives or her friends as a memorial, something, not a memorial, but something to remember her by. These photographs were, the small and fairly economical, so they're very popular sort of thing to have multiples taken and handed out to your friends so that everyone could keep it as a memento, as a keepsake. The back of the photograph, very elaborate, very fancy. It says, from the studio of the Crane Art Company, artist photographer, negatives kept, copies can be had, so you can always get more. Instantaneous pictures of children, a successful specialty. And I'm sure if any of you have tried to take a photograph of young children and get them to hold still for that photo, you understand that challenge. And in addition to which, sittings made in cloudy weather as well as fair. So letting you know that he has plenty of studio lights to get those good quality photos. The next one, first was very promising, the last name written across the top. But then when I pulled it out and looked at the bottom, initial excitement, there's a date, 1882, fantastic. But the photography studio is in Albany, New York. So not a local person, but someone who knew people locally, and they saved his photo. I love his mustache, this whole huge handlebar thing going on there. Very heavy clothing. I mean, lots of layers. He definitely lives in Albany. He's got a coat over his jacket, over his vest. You can see the chain for his pocket watch on the vest. Really elaborate outfit. This photograph, once again, the woman's name was never written down, so we don't know who she is. The photographer, Annaldridge, was at 82 Bank Street, as far as I can tell, maybe 1 year only, 1886. So again, really good for dating the photograph. Unfortunately, no clue as to her name. When I zoom in on the photo, you can see that the photographer in his studio has this great architectural backdrop that makes it look like she's in some sort of beautiful Gothic building with all of these frescoes and the stairs, but all of that is just the backdrop for her photograph. It looks like she has blue eyes. Looks like she's got blue eyes. Mr. Cullum, Aldridge, again at 82 Bank Street, so again, 1886. There were several Cullums in Waterbury, so I don't know which one of them he would be. There were 3 or 4 of them. Mrs. Strong, again, L.D. Benton, the popular photographer with this group. So 1880s. I have not yet found out who Mrs. Strong was, even though her name is there. I have not yet pinpointed exactly who she would have been. And again, use those cell phone cameras to take those, detailed pictures. Jane, did you have a question? Oh, you're on mute.
Does it say she's from Naugatuck?
I don't know if that says what that says.
Can't tell if it's Mary or Naug.
Right. It could even be Nancy, maybe.
Oh, okay.
It's, yeah, this handwriting is tricky. So that's, that's one of the ones where if you spent enough time, you might be able to decipher it. So, as I was saying, use your cell phone to take some photos of photos. You can go right up close to it and get some really good details. The earrings that she's wearing, the pin at her throat, even the details of the buttons on her dress are just beautiful. So John Riordan, this was another one where I thought, oh, full name, should be able to figure this out. The photographer was located at 189 and a half Bank Street in 1886 and 1887. But there were, of course, several men with the same name in Waterbury at that time. So it would be, really a process to figure out, to try to guess which one he might have been. And the best way, of course, is if you can ever find another photograph of the same person. These two women, no identification, no photographer studio indicated, but just beautiful outfits that they're wearing. I think there's an actual bird's wing stuck on the hat of the woman on the left. The height of Victorian fashion. Now the children, I usually kind of look at photos of children and think, well, we'll never figure out who they are. But they put a couple clues here that may help me pinpoint exactly who they are. So the name that was written above the photo in the photo album, very easy to read, Matt and Katie Donnelly. The photographer, Annaldridge, at 11 Exchange Place. Annaldridge was at 11 Exchange Place for a very brief period of time around 1889. So these two things actually made it really easy to figure out who these kids were. You can tell from the photograph the approximate age of the two children. And so I was able to pinpoint Matthew Patrick Donnelly, born in 1887, and his sister Katie, born in 1885. Their parents, Patrick and Mary, arrived from Ireland in 1880. So the family had been here for almost a decade when they had this great photo of their two kids taken. Patrick worked in the factories, and Mary stayed home and took care of the kids and had more children after Matt and Katie. Matthew Patrick Donnelly lived in Waterbury his whole life and worked in the brass factories. Katie married someone whose last name was Golden, and she stayed with her family, with the Donnelly family, and also worked in the factories off and on over the years. I believe this is our Toddy and Mary Riley. So another photograph of children. And this was another one where I was able to figure out who this is. Mary Riley, or at least someone named Mary Riley, was born in 1891 to Irish immigrants, John and Bridget Riley, who worked in the factory. The photographer location didn't really help. J.F. Farrell on Bank Street, he was there a good long time, starting in 1887. But that's, that was sort of my first guess there. And I'm actually going to come back to this photograph when we get a little further into the album. Getting the dog to pose and the baby to pose, I got to tell you, that's a challenge. Mrs. Whalen, again, a local photographer that helps to figure out when, the approximate time period. And in 1889, there were a lot of Whalens in Waterbury, so it's hard to say for certain, but there was a Catherine Whalen who was a widow in 1889. So perhaps this was her, I don't know, but it's one possibility. Now this photo, I thought for sure, I thought Jerry and Fanny, maybe Lolly. I thought absolutely, I'll figure out who these people are. I have their names, this is great. And it's such, I love this photograph. They're both wearing flowers, which makes me wonder if they're newlyweds, if this is some sort of form of wedding photo, since they both have flowers that they're wearing. I don't know, but it certainly seems like it. And they certainly seem very happy and very enthusiastic, just absolutely a lovely couple. But I don't know, they may not be in Waterbury. If you go back to the photograph, you'll see there is no studio, there's no photographer listed. This may be a photograph from somewhere else. And so I have not been successful in finding out any information about them. Further into the photo album, we get into the carte de visite, which are those smaller photographs mounted on cardboard that are like the size of a business card, a little bit larger than a business card. And they functioned a lot like a business card. You would, a carte de visite, a visit card. This is something that you would hand out. You'd have a ton of them and you'd hand them out to your friends, to your family, to business associates. Also in this section, you can see a lot of the photographs have been removed, unfortunately. But in this section, in addition to the photograph on the cardboard, there's also a tintype. So this fantastic photograph is a tintype where the photograph is printed directly onto the piece of metal. This makes it very tricky to handle. You have to be very, very careful that you don't touch the image with your bare hand, because the oils from your finger, even if your hands are clean, can cause damage to it. So you always want to try to hold it on the edges and of course make sure your hands are clean. This is in really great condition. So this style of photo album did a great job of preserving this image. And we have two names, Pat Coogan and Owen D. My first thought was, I'll never figure out who Owen D is. That's not enough information. And this is all assuming that these two men were in Waterbury. And we're looking at, let's say this is probably around 1890, based on the dates of all the other photographs in here. And this is where, again, doing that online search using Ancestry to search the city directories makes your life really easy. You can actually specify a specific year. You can put in just the name Owen, or you can put in the name Owen, and for the last name, put in the letter D and an asterisk, so it knows that you don't know the rest of the name. And so in 1890, there were only two Owen Ds in Waterbury. So that simplified things tremendously. There's an Owen Donahue and a Eugene Owen Donnelly. So one of those is probably the Owen in this photo. There were two Patrick Coogans. One of the Patricks lived at 12 Washington, and the other one moved to Detroit in 1890. So what is this photograph? Is it possibly a goodbye present to a friend? Is this the Pat Coogan who moves to Detroit, and the two of them are friends and they take this photo together before perhaps they're never going to see each other again? I don't know. It's one of those mysteries that that comes out of these great photo albums. It is a really just magnificent photo of friendship. And so it, I think there's a possibility that it is hey, we're best friends, you're moving away, let's take a photo together so that we remember each other. This one, I think that's Fanning, perhaps as the name. On the back of the photograph, there is that purple stamp that says Hutchison photographer and portrait painter, and I am pretty sure the location is Londonderry. So here is a photo that traveled all the way from Ireland to end up in this Waterbury photo album. This one, if you have any ideas as to what the first name is there for Mr. Sullivan, this would be helpful. It kind of looks like Neil, but then there's an extra like squiggly thing there in between the first name and the word Sullivan. This one photograph is tantalizing because they wrote underneath uncle. So this is the uncle of whoever put together this photo album. So if I could figure out who this man is, I might have a better idea of who put the album together, and then that might help me figure out who all the other people are. But that first name there, and like I said, it looks like Neil, but there's something else going on there, so I'm not quite sure. And I also don't recognize the uniform that he's wearing. So that's another one where I'd have to do some poking around and look for those uniforms, check Ireland, of course, to see if that gives me any clues as to what he's wearing. and then try to figure out who he was. Mrs. Flannery, no other information, and a quick search did not pull up any really useful information as to who she might be. Never mind which of the two women was Mrs. Flannery. This one, however, W. McNally, there was only one W. McNally, and that was Walter McNally, who worked in the factories in Waterbury. This one, with this photograph, if you look, there's a little bit of a rosy tint to his cheeks. It was common, even with a tintype photograph, to basically hand paint it and add just a little bit of color, often just that little bit of pink to the cheeks of the figure. Group photograph, we know it's taken in Waterbury, but there's no other information as to who these folks might be. This one, the first name, so Mrs. something with a J, maybe it's Mrs. Julia Lynch. I have not yet figured that one out. The photograph was taken in Birmingham, Connecticut, which of course is Derby area. So somebody, I think Mrs. Julia Lynch from down in the Derby area. Mrs. Spillane from Boston. This is another one where I'm not quite sure about that first name. The last name, pretty obvious as O'Brien. And then this photo. So here's, I'm showing you the full page so you can see how it is, and I'll go to the right way around. So so all these photographs, you know, it's a single portrait, very studio portrait, you know, with the props and the posing and everything. And then there's this. I love this photograph. This photograph is absolutely amazing. You've got the three men in the factory leaning on the machinery. And it's a really good image of the machinery. I don't know what type of machine that is, but it's absolutely fantastic. You can see they're wearing their work clothes, and just, I mean, it's very modern in their poses and their expression. It's absolutely fantastic. So at the top of that photograph, on that page, again, it says C. Foy or Fay. So if you remember, we had a Charlie Foy. So if I go to Charlie here, so here's that photograph of Charlie Foy. And I go back here, and I think maybe the man on the right with the mustache is Charlie Foy. I spent some time going back and forth and back and forth, back and forth. So this would be when he was younger, and then this would be when he's a bit older, maybe 10 years older, growing out his mustache and working in the factory. Not really sure, but it's still an absolutely fantastic photograph. Would love to know who all of them are and where it was taken. But this is, you know, this is sort of the quintessential Brass Valley experience, the Irish immigrants working in the brass factories all up and down the Naugatuck Valley. So this photograph is just fantastic. I just love their attitude. Two more children. So James and Mary Deegan. And again, going by the location of the photographer, Grannis at 15 South Main Street, going by the approximate date of the photograph being about 1890, 1891, somewhere in there. James and Mary Deegan, born 1888 and 1890. Their parents, Patrick and Mary, were again Irish immigrants. Their father actually arrived only in 1887. Their mother arrived in 1879. So their father had been in this country for only a few years when he had this photograph of his kids taken.
I love the expression on James.
Yeah, I'm not sure James is all that excited about this photo. I'm not sure either one of them is all that excited about this photograph. So then this photograph. It's another photo by L.D. Benton. Unfortunately, at some point in time, this photograph got bent in half and snapped. This is the sort of thing that can be fixed in Photoshop, although it's pretty takes a long time to fix that in Photoshop. Over the top of the photo is a word that looked like Brady's, but on the back of the photo, it says B. Riley. So if you recall our Toddy and Mary Riley here, Mary Riley was the daughter of Bridget Riley. So perhaps this is Bridget Riley, perhaps this is Mary's mother. Bridget Riley was born in 1864 in Ireland. She came to the US in 1880 and eventually gave birth to at least 11 children. And her husband, John, worked for the City of Waterbury Parks Department. So a really great photograph of Waterbury Irish immigrant. This photo is in the worst condition and does not have any identification on it. Lots of damage, unfortunately, to this one. This is why it's important to store your photographs in a way that will be sturdy. It's not just that it has the damage going across where it's been bent, but it also looks pretty filthy. Lots of dirt and grime on it as well. It can be touched up in Photoshop if you scan it in, but again, it's good to provide adequate storage so you don't have to do this restoration work. And the last photo in the album is this child. No name, but now that's a pose. That is a child who definitely was excited to have his photograph taken. So this is just this fantastic photo album. Almost all Waterbury or Naugatuck Valley and people they knew, and a little bit of the work it took. Are there questions specifically about this? Are there other questions about identifying family photos or how to store family photos or any of those sorts of things?
Did you ever figure out whose actual family this album was from?
No. Our mailman, I believe, said that it is from someone in his family, but he wasn't really clear on, you know, something that he inherited, but he wasn't really clear exactly on the whole ancestry of the album.
On these later pictures, you said they the line on the outside of the picture was more of about 1890.
Yeah, so let me go back.
So that one that you just showed there that was very damaged, was that also an 1890?
So this one is this one has the yellow background. So it's on like a yellow cardboard, which is different from the others. It's also an oval, which gives you a clue that it's a bit later in time. But the edge that I was talking about specifically, if you look, all of these cards have a straight edge. And then if we get back, straight edge, it's gonna go back a little ways here. Oh, there it is. This has the kind of like a zigzaggy edge, like a scallop edge on it.
That's
So
more the 1890.
Right.
Yeah.
That's more the 1890s. Yep.
We have a bunch that look like 1880, which is more of, if you click back a couple pictures there, you could see them there about like that.
Right. Yep. Yeah, that's that one actually is also, you know, you can always tell when something started, you know, like if you think about fashion, there's usually a definite start date for fashion, but there's not always a definite end date for fashion. So, you know, if you took a photograph of somebody in bell bottoms today, that doesn't mean that they're from the 1970s, you know, it's, but you're probably not going to see a bell bottoms in a photograph from the 1950s.
No.
Most likely. Other questions?
Were some used as postcards? I know some were mailed.
So these specifically, I have not seen this type of photograph. I have not seen, but you could, just as you can today, have a photograph made as a postcard to be sent in the mail.
Mhm.
So many photographers in town, up and down Bank Street.
That's what I
Yes.
was thinking.
Yes.
But
On every
nobody had a
corner.
camera. A family friend came to take our prom pictures because we didn't have a camera.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no, it was not until, actually I have that on a different thing here. I'm actually going to change my screen share to something else that I have that I did a few years back. So this is a blog post that I did on dating your family photos. So, you know, information like there were no photos really before the 1840s. This is a great daguerreotype of St. John's Church on the Green. The Scoville Union case. So those daguerreotypes, which were the photographs on glass, those would be stored in a very heavy duty case so that they wouldn't break because they were literally glass. You could also put a tintype. So the photograph printed directly on a piece of metal could also go into those cases. So studio portraits. So here is a tintype by a Waterbury photographer who was on Bank Street for a long time, from 1855 to 1876. And so here's one of those hand painted. The rosy cheeks on the figure were painted by hand onto the piece of tin. So here we go. Here's what I was looking for. So George Eastman introduced photographic film cameras in 1885. And so photography for the masses really kicks off in 1888 when Eastman introduces his affordable Kodak camera. So it's not really until the 1890s that you see, and you're talking more the middle class and the upper middle class, that you're going to see individual people owning a camera. And you're going to see everyone, teenage girls, adult men. The Waterbury Photographic Society started in 1888, and it exhibited the work of amateur photographers. So that's, you know, part of the reason why you see all of these very formal studio photographs, because you don't really see cameras as something that the average person has, and taking those snapshots is also unusual. The earliest snapshots really are these cyanotypes, these little blue photographs, which were popular in the 1890s. So it's you know, that formal studio photograph, if you wanted a really good quality photograph to share with your family, with your friends, you really probably need to go pay the professional photographer to take that photo in their studio with all of their props. Other things we've got here, and then checking the fashion, looking to see what people are wearing, trying to go by the popular fashion of the day. This is a really early photo. This is the 1840s with these big ties.
Uh-huh.
This is another 1840s photograph with the Silas Hoadley clock workers. The clock workers are there in their working class outfits, but then you also have the factory owner who's wearing the top hat and has the big bow tie. He might very well have a cigar in his hand for all I can tell from this photograph. So giving you, you know, a sense of the fashions. Another photograph, 1840s, 1850s, very formal.
Yeah, those old ones.
The Scoville Brass Company was huge with the photography industry. Everything, you know, relied on on brass. The cases are all brass, covered in gilt. All of the camera equipment involves metal and brass.
He was around?
Yeah.
So there are actually, so if you look on eBay, for example, you will find a lot of Scoville daguerreotypes. But when you see a Scoville daguerreotype, it's not necessarily from Waterbury because they sold their supplies all over the entire world.
Oh.
So this is another one where this is a photograph that was in a Scoville case, but that doesn't mean the photograph was taken in Waterbury. Civil War outfits that women wore. The Civil War era is when you really see a flourishing of the carte de visite, the small paper photograph that is mounted on a little piece of cardboard, fairly small. They're just huge boom in photography and in those carte de visites during this time period.
Thomas Appleton Jr.
What's it called?
So
What did you say?
It's mounted on a cardboard. We have that downstairs. That was in the 1860s, 1850s.
and then, so 1887, you start seeing more of the snapshot. You start seeing these outdoor photographs of photographing big events. This particular one is the crowd watching the Barnum Circus Parade heading down South Main Street from the Green in 1887. Students at St. Margaret School in 1887. So again, this is the photographer's studio with the hay in front to look like grass, and then you can see the painted backdrop behind the girls. 1890s.
Richard.
Hmm.
Wow.
This
Like
one, she's got
hair.
like a top knot on her, her hair goes up, and that's more of a late 1890s fashion. And then here, this woman has this, poofy, poofy bangs in front here, which was popular in the late 1890s and early 1900s. So if you think about it, when you're taking these photos, these are formal photographs, you're paying a photographer to do this. So you're gonna be really conscious about your clothing and your hair. You wanna look your best because unlike today, today there's 1,000 photographs taken of people every year, constantly. But in this time period, it was a very special occasion. So when you're looking at these photos, be thinking about the fact that they made a choice about what to wear. They wanted to look their best for these photographs.
Her hair looks like high school boys now.
Yeah.
With that little front.
And then the wealthy in Waterbury, Edith Wayne Goss, wife of Chauncey Porter Goss Jr., who ran the factories right around 1900. So she's, this is an absolutely magnificent outfit she's got on. By 1900, you start seeing more and more photographs being taken. The cameras are becoming more commonplace. This photograph, there's a really rich depth of contrast. There's a lot of texture. It's a really high quality photograph that would have been taken by a professional photographer. As opposed to this, which is more of the casual snapshot of the Burrell family on Church Street around 1908.
Yeah.
Grandmother and
The women are wearing kind of the Gibson girl look.
It's 1908 though.
yeah,
They've got the shirt waist, the cotton shirt waist, the lightweight cotton shirt, the bow tie, and the skirts. It's really, fashion can be very helpful in dating the photograph. Little girls with giant bows in their hair is very much a 19-teens sort of thing, World War I era. This photo's from about 1914. And the girls have short hair and then the giant bow. So that's what I've got for you. Other questions or comments or anything you'd like to share?